Hello, DePauw, and hello, world. Welcome to The Outlook, a show that looks at current and political events happening around the world in ways that educate and involve students here at DePauw. And now, introducing your host, Haley Menendez.
Welcome back to The Outlook. In today's episode, we'll be looking at recent events between Russia and Ukraine, how this war started and why. We'll also look at what this event means for the future and what this could mean for the U.S. In recent weeks, we have seen Ukraine make advances that no one was expecting, especially not Putin. The news has gone from bad to worse for Russia over the past 2 weeks. These problems all began when Ukraine forces recaptured parts of the country's northeast in a quite successful counterattack. Since then, Russia's struggles seem to have grown. This led Putin to take steps that he's been resisting. He called an additional 300,000 troops, mostly former soldiers. In doing so, he was forced to recognize the war is not going as well as he'd hoped. He states in one of his speeches that the mobilization was necessary and urgent because the West had crossed all lines in providing weapons to Ukraine. After defending for months, Ukraine is now dictating the war, choosing where they want to press new offenses while Russia defends. Russia accuses the West of seeking to destroy Russia and warned that Russia has various means of destruction, some more modern than those of NATO countries. Western leaders think of Putin's partial mobilization order as an admission of failure and desperation. And to bring up the use of nuclear weapons is an even bigger detriment. But let's step back and unpack how all this started and why. Back in 1991, Ukraine declared its independence after the Soviet Union collapsed. And at this time, a good amount of the Soviet nuclear arsenals were within Ukraine's borders. But Ukraine later agreed to transfer those weapons back to Russia. However, in the past year, Russia spent weeks building up a substantial military force along the border both of Ukraine and Belarus. Putin launched an invasion on Ukraine back in February of 2022. But this isn't the first time this has happened. Russian forces last invaded eastern Ukraine back in 2014. At a time, Putin claimed the assault was merely a defense for ethnic Russians who lived in Ukraine regions, many who didn't support the country's new pro-Western government. But Putin used this invasion to take part of Ukraine, in which he annexed the Crimean Peninsula, which Russia has controlled since 2014. In recent years, we began to see a shift in the democratic elected government and movement toward more Western European ideals. Yet, the cultural ties with Russia remain, especially in Russian-speaking parts of the country. The big question everyone is asking is, what does Putin want? Let's go to our guest speaker for the week, Professor Deepa, to see if she has any answers. My name is Haley Menendez, and I'm here with
Deepa Prakash. I teach in political science. Haley, you're in my international relations class right now, and that's what I specialize in. I do international relations, and I actually specialize in international security, terrorism. So I'm excited for this chat today.
Right, very interesting. Okay, so one of the big questions that I have for you is, back when Ukraine gained its independence, there were these nuclear arsenal weapons that they were in their territory. They decided to give them back to Russia. Could you explain a little bit of why that was?
Yeah, and in fact, that's a really good question to ask. Obviously everyone's interested in the context of Putin's threats, right, to perhaps use nuclear weapons. And yes, I think what is really interesting is that it's sort of a historical puzzle. Why would a country give up nuclear weapons once they have them? Very few countries have them, and historically, only 3 countries have sort of given them up, or given up even nuclear programs. So South Africa and Argentina being the others. Actually, what happened was that exactly what's led to this conflict right now was the worry back in 1993-94. And there were these talks that were going on between the U.S., the Soviet Union, Russia, and Ukraine. And the idea was, how do you reassure Russia that Ukraine is not going to become a part of the West or become part of NATO? Right. So very similar to the kinds of worries that Putin is citing. How do you reassure them of that? But how do you also reassure Ukraine that precisely what happened to them wouldn't happen to them, right? And the deal that was struck through a series of kind of agreements, but really what we think of as the Budapest Agreement, basically said in return for Western guarantees of security, Ukraine would give up its nuclear weapons. And this would, basically supposed to mollify Russia. And at the time, all these states sort of signed off on it. And Ukraine, and it was controversial even at the time.
Right.
There were people within Ukraine that said this was not a good idea, it was going to leave Ukraine vulnerable, and that its major deterrent against Russia would be removed. And now, fast forward however many years,
right? Now
that seems to be happening.
Yep.
So, in fact, that the context was to reassure Russia, and the idea was that Ukraine would then feel that it had the cover of Western security.
And do you think, in your opinion, Russia would go as far as to use it?
That's the $1 million question. I think it's highly unlikely. So the big question is exactly what you're asking. Is this just a bluff? Putin made a similar threat right when the war started. So it's not like this is coming completely out of the blue, though this seems to be, this idea, why is he saying it again? So there's two readings of it. One is that he's doing what we call, he's escalating to de-escalate, right? And that was actually more credible the first time around when the war started. That was the idea that you give a big threat, and you force, in this case, the West to kind of back off, or Ukraine to sort of back off, right? And so, yes, you escalate and you do make things a little scary, but you do it in the hopes that, it de-escalates. Right now, the idea is that Russia's suffered quite a few reversals. First of all, Ukraine's been much more resilient in this war and has even taken back territory that it lost. And it's just gone on much longer than people would have thought, certainly Putin would have thought. Secondly, the West has already really come down hard on Russia, whether it's by sanctions or, even rhetoric. But even some of Russia's allies or states that have been a little bit neutral, China, India, etc., are beginning to be a little wary. So, yes, last week there was a meeting and the Chinese expressed concerns to Putin, and he kind of acknowledged that. And India, the prime minister said, this is no time for war, right? So all these indications that they're kind of trying to distance themselves from Russia. So right now it could be just pure desperation, defiance, right? A way to, again, try to change the trajectory of the war. And Putin has not only mobilized forces, but he's made this threat. That said, it would be it would be a complete game changer. And Putin's got to know that, you don't win nuclear wars.
Right.
So I think it's highly unlikely, I hope it's highly unlikely that he would follow through. One game changer is that Russia has a lot of nuclear warheads. In fact, it has the most in the world.
Oh, wow.
That might be a little surprising. People might think it's the U.S., but actually Russia just edges out the U.S. a little bit more. And it also has access to, or it owns, tactical nuclear weapons, which are smaller nuclear weapons, which are not what we think of when we think nuclear weapons, right? So these would be weapons that are super destructive, yes, but they could be used on a battlefield. They would do a lot of damage, but not the kind of damage we think of when we think of nuclear weapons, right? So if he's thinking of something like that, it ups the worry a little bit. Right before I talked to you, I checked this the website of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. They're the key scientists that follow these kinds of, follow everything to do with nuclear weapons and atomic energy. And they, they take this very seriously. So we're all, I think, hoping that he's bluffing again. But never say never.
Well, I appreciate you talking with us today.
Oh, absolutely. It was a pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Deepa, for your take on this topic. To simply explain it, Putin's ambition is to restore the Russian Empire. He often talks about how there are these ethnic ties between Russia and Ukraine. He does not like the idea of NATO expanding further into his borders. Putin has this obsession with restoring Russia to its national greatness, going back to the collapse of the Soviet Union. But his plan isn't to make Russia great. Instead, it's to drag everyone else down, which we have seen in the past and now in the present. Ukraine's citizens aren't the only ones that are unhappy. We have started seeing many Russians protesting across the country, leaving at least 1,250 people detained, and allies questioning if they want to continue backing Putin and his plan. But I am curious to see what students here at DePauw have to say about this ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine.
My name is Ross Gardner. I'm the interviewer for The Outlook this week, and we're going to conquer a quest here. We're going to see who knows what's going on in Russia. We're going to see who knows the leaders of Russia and Ukraine, and we're going to find out who knows the allies of Russia. And also, we're going to have a fourth bonus surprise question that you got to wait and see. Let's get into it. What's your name?
Kasim Liman.
Kasim. All right, so the first question is, do you know what's going on between Russia and Ukraine?
I have no clue, but as far as I know that there's just a war happening.
It's a war? Okay. What's your name?
I am Giovanni Salina. It's nice to meet you.
Do you know the leaders of Russia and Ukraine?
Leaders of Russia is I do not actually. Putin.
Mm-hmm.
Putin is one of them, and Ukraine is. Educate me, man.
What's your name?
I'm Tamaria.
Tamaria. Okay. Do you know any allies of Russia?
The ghetto place that we're in right now.
Fourth and final question is, do you know what the outlook is?
Do I know what the outlook is, as into like the future?
No, like the outlook, the show.
No, I do not.
Okay, so the outlook can be found on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram on D3TV, hosted by Haley Menendez. Just giving us, facts about the world and current events that's happening. So, check it out if you got the time.
I definitely will. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it, bro.
Thank you, Ross. And again, thank you, Professor Deepa. That is all we have for this episode. I'm Haley Menendez.
Please tune in and join us next Monday at 7 p.m. Have a great night. This is The Outlook.